to welcome our speaker, Julie Miller. Julie is the president and co-founder of Joint Pivot and an ICF certificate executive coach. I'm not going to talk anymore because I know Julie can introduce herself perfectly. So Julie, thank you for joining us today. We're super excited to have you. And I'm going to stop sharing and you may share your screen whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited to talk with the group today. It's so nice to see so many people and so many friendly faces out there. I see a couple of my clients and friends, so it's always nice to be able to share this information with others, which is why I actually love my job as much as I do, because I get to talk with people about change, continuous improvement, strategic planning all day long with a lot of different people. So a little bit about me, why you should even listen to me when it comes to change management. Well, who am I? Well, I'm a dog person. If you didn't catch that from the first picture, I run my dogs in agility. So if you've ever seen the competitions, the dogs running around doing jumps and teeter-totters and A-frames and stuff like that, that's me. My dogs run at 4 inches. So I call it hamster agility because they barely jump over the bar because they're so short. So that's what I get to do in my free time. But when I'm not running the dogs in agility, I am actually an engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer by undergrad. I got my master's in organizational behavior, which is when I started to get into more of the coaching and the people side of change management. While I was working in engineering, I spent so much time doing Lean and Six Sigma. I actually became a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and realized that during that time, all I did was ask people to change. Every single continuous improvement project that I worked on was around change management. It's easy to change systems. It's easy to change processes. The hard part is the people. And I found, at least for me, and I pick on myself, I joke I'm a recovering engineer, that sometimes we're not the best when it comes to change in the people side of it. So that's where I love marrying the two of the people side and the engineering and the change management. And a few years ago, I went to school for executive coaching, which even completely opened up my world even more when it comes to being able to ask effective questions and really get into the root cause of the issue, because sometimes it's not a process issue or a system issue, something physical that we can fix. It's a people issue. But if we don't have the coaching skills that go behind it, sometimes we can't dig that out. So I am, what I say out there, a certified improvement dork, because I live and breathe this stuff. If you come to my house or my condo here where I'm at, you will see everything is organized in 5S. I use change management on my husband all the time. Most of the time now, he just asks me, are you trying to ad car me? And the answer is usually yes. So he mostly just tells me, what do you want me to do? But I do use this stuff all of the time. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to do this as my profession. So a little bit about Joint Pivot here. We do Lean, Six Sigma, project management, change management, leadership development, coaching, problem solving, process improvement, and strategic planning. All of these things that require one common theme of change. Every time I ask everybody to do something a little bit better than they did the day before, which is change. That's my definition when it comes to change. And I realize everybody has a different definition of what change is. Sometimes it's really big, sometimes it's really small, and we don't get to tell people how big or small the change is. It's our job to ask questions about the change and how it actually impacts them, because only then can we do a better job at change management. So what I want to cover today are a few things. One is I want to cover open-ended questions and how to craft what those open-ended questions are. This was a light bulb moment for me when I started learning about executive coaching. And a lot of what coaching is about how you ask the questions and how you get more out of people. How do you learn more about what their issues are, what they might be scared of? That is all in the way that you ask the questions. So when I started to connect that with continuous improvement, just a complete game changer here for me. I want you to think about how those open-ended questions then take the ownership from you, typically as a facilitator, and move it onto the people who are participating on the project team. it is so tempting as the facilitator, whether you are the change management professional or the project manager or a project lead that's running the project, to take on all the action items. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to leave the ownership with those people who are on the project team. So these questions can really help you with that as well. I also want you thinking about clear and direct open-ended communications, and think about how those open up a reflection period. I know for me, when I ask a really good question, or at least I know when I ask a really good question, is when I get like 10 seconds of silence and they're like, oh, I've never thought about that before. Or it's like, ooh, that's a good question. Because most of the time we ask close-ended questions, the yes/no ones. So these can really drive reflection when you ask them correctly. To finally cover our objectives is I want to talk about the open-ended questions that I might ask during each different phase of process improvement. So how I might ask them, when I might ask them, what I might do with them. So I'm going to share some best practices with you about this as well. And for me, I actually did my first ProSci ADKAR training back in 2008. So it's coming up on 20 some years, 17 years at this point that I've been doing change management. We'll just say that I started when I was 8. That sounds great. But I've been doing this for quite a long time at this point, and I have done great things. I've also fallen flat on my face. So it's great to be able to share the things that went well, the things that didn't go well, what I would change for next time. And I'm super excited to share that with everybody here today. So thinking about this, and what I want you to walk away with is, I want you essentially to walk away with something that you can take today and be more impactful, take action on it, get the information that you need personally to actually provide value facilitation and valuable participation as well, getting your team members to dig very, very deep into their experience and go more than just surface level in the information that they're giving to you. Because when you can ask those questions in the correct way, it's like gold to work with. Gold, Jerry Gold, if you're a Seinfeld watcher out there, that is what you really hear in these cases. And I'm always feverishly writing down some of the responses to this, because you can use this information later in the project. And when you can use that information, people will love what you have to do. You're putting money in that change piggy bank with them, so that later when you have to ask them to do something tough, they're more willing to. So that is the gold that I'm talking about. So many of us have done process improvement. Otherwise, probably wouldn't be here today. So change management, process improvement, it's always trying to make something better. We're always looking to change better. And when I'm looking at process improvement, of course, I'm sitting out there. Maybe I might be a subject matter expert on the topic. Maybe I'm not. Sometimes I walk into situations where I know absolutely nothing about the subject, but they've hired me to come out there and figure out what the problem is. That's where I have to ask open-ended questions, because I have to educate myself. Sometimes I'm working with people who love process change, which is very few and far between. I don't know anybody who really wakes up in the morning and is like, you know what, let's go have some more change today. Most of the time it's like pulling teeth. You forget how complacent people get and how much they love current state. Even if they complain about it every so often, they know the workarounds, so they get really comfortable with it. So the odds of you actually working with people who love process change, probably not super high. Number 3 that I would love here, all the people know the process, are present and accounted for in your meeting. I would love that. Sometimes I get like 2/3 of them. Sometimes I hope they would be there, but then they don't end up showing up. So we all know we've got that to work around. Number 4 here, there's no resistance. There is no world that this exists in. There is always resistance to the process. In fact, years ago, almost for about a decade, I used to be a judge for the American Society of Quality's International Team Excellence Awards. And there was a question on there that asks, how did you identify the resistance to this project and what did you do to address it? And it was one of my favorite questions in the ITEA process. And If somebody answered that question and said there was no resistance identified, so there was nothing to address, it automatically got 0 points from me. So I was like, you weren't trying hard enough because there is always going to be resistance there that you have to plan for. And then the last one on our checklist here, people are forthcoming with all of the information that they just blurt out everything that you need. Half the time, I feel like I am working with like a magical set of lock and keys that I have to ask questions with certain words in certain ways in a certain order just to get information out of them. There's so many times where I ask a question and then maybe a day or two later, I get the answer to it. And they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that as being the answer to the question you asked 2 days ago. So hopefully some of these open-ended questions can help you with that. That checklist is a unicorn. There's no way we ever get to check off all 5 of those. So that's why for us as the facilitator of the change, we have to put on our own unicorn hats and set us up for success. And one of the ways that I think we can do an even better job of that is thinking about the way that we ask our questions. So you've heard me say a little bit about open-ended questions and close-ended questions. And let me talk a little bit about what the difference is between the two of those. And this can be as simple as swapping out the first word in these questions. And once you figure this little trick out, it just opens up your entire world. Close-ended questions are those that can basically be answered with one word. So you think about do, have, did, was, can, could, will, are. Those can all be answered with yes or no. And when you're trying to get more information out of people, and you've got a really stubborn person sitting across from you, and you ask them a question, did that work for you? And they go, no. You're like, great, there's nothing there for me to work with. What isn't working? What? That's an open-ended question. But when we simply ask a close-ended question, you're more likely to get a one single word answer versus on the open-ended side, the how, when, who, why, what, where, if, those are more open questions. Those are ones that require more than a yes or no answer, or more of say less than a binary answer in those cases, that they have to expand a little bit on something. Yes, I realize sometimes they can be leading questions. I would say I'm probably guilty as a facilitator of asking leading questions sometimes when you know that the answer is like right there, but the team just can't seem to get there. So yes, occasionally I might throw in a leading open-ended question to be like, well, what would happen if we thought about it this way? Great, now I've laid that out on the table for them, but I've left the ownership with them because I'm asking them what would happen. I'm not going to answer that question. I'm asking them what that answer might be. These open-ended questions should be pretty powerful. They're clarity seeking. They're very probing. They're challenging. They're thought-provoking. And like I said before, my favorite way to know that these questions are working is when I get the silence actually from people for a few seconds while they think about it. Because a lot of the times in my meetings, I've got people who are listening to respond instead of listening to understand. And when they're listening to respond and I throw out an open-ended question to them, they also have to understand now. So it can start to shift that. They can't just throw in an answer real quick. This also requires you to be a little bit comfortable with silence. And I know sometimes that feels like it's a really long time. Sometimes when I'm not on screen with people, if I can't see them on camera, the silence is like, did I lose them? Did we lose the connection? Are they on mute? So that's why I do recommend a lot of these times keep people on camera, because you'll be able to see, are they just thinking or is there something wrong? But I will count to 3 to 5 Mississippis while they're thinking through it. So I'll ask a good open-ended question. And then in my mind, I'm sitting there going 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi as I go, because I'm waiting for them to answer. You'll also see me all the time with my water bottle here, because I like to ask open-ended questions. I'll stop, take a sip while they answer. waiting for them to kind of think through it because I don't want to push them or pressure them into an answer. I'd rather have them think through the question instead of just blurt something out because they don't like the silence. So if they see that I'm not speaking and I'm waiting, I'm getting a drink, typically they'll continue to talk more. One of the great examples of this that I saw, probably not real good for this gentleman, but if any of you are true crime watchers and watch the Alex Murdaugh trial, in that trial, the prosecution was amazing because all they did was throw open-ended questions out at Alex when he was on the stand. And he had a tendency just to like word vomit. It was just, it could not stop him. And it did not show very favorably for him, which was likely a good thing. But that prosecutor was using all open-ended questions. They were not yes or no questions. Typically, lawyers are going to ask you very directed, close-ended questions when they don't want more information to come out. Watch the next trial if you do watch trials at all, watch and see when they change from close-ended to open-ended questions because they're trying to coach people into talking or not talking. So lawyers use these very strategically when they're trying to try a case. So just keep attention if you are a trial watcher. This is a great thing to be able to see how this is actually executed really, really well. So let's look at a quick example of a close-ended question. When you ask a close-ended question, which is some sort of binary response, like a yes or no, a pass or fail, or my least favorite one in the entire world, which makes me want to like facepalm, is when they answer with the, well, it depends. I think it depends is like nails on a chalkboard when I'm doing continuous improvement and change management, because I'll ask, well, what happens when we do XYZ? Or I'll say, what is this what happens? I'll do a close-ended questions with them. And they'll say, well, it depends. And I'll ask them, what does it depend on? And then they'll mouth off like 8 different possible scenarios. And I was like, well, that's probably why we're running into so many problems because you're giving people 8 different choices at this point versus maybe 2 or 3. It's almost like you're getting the Cheesecake Factory menu of answers back when it comes to continuous improvement when they answer with it depends. When the answer is it depends, I find most often in change management, it brings that discussion to an abrupt halt because that is now somebody who's going to go off on their soapbox and essentially be like, back in 1984, this thing happened and we need to be careful of this and we should do a change around that. You don't need to do that. We need to be talking about the things that happen about the majority of the time. So we don't want to use those close-ended questions that are going to bring things to a halt. We want to use the open-ended questions. Those open-ended questions, again, are the thought-provoking ones. Those should be super challenging. If any of you go to therapy or if you work with a coach, or even if you've ever been, I would say, quizzed by a counselor sometimes when they're asking you what you might want to do, those are the ones that you're like, I'm stopped and I'm like, I don't know. I've never been asked that question before. Or if somebody is really hesitant in a change that is moving forward and you stop and you ask them, what's really worrying you about this change? And they have to be like, I don't know. I don't know what's really worrying me about. We can dig into that. And that's the root cause that's probably more personal for them than anything, which if you think about ADKAR, it's that desire and resistance, which that is the hardest step of ADKAR because it is so inherently personal. These open-ended questions are going to help you dive in to the desire and the resistance because they are so reflective and thinking about getting into people's minds and getting curious about why they feel that way. I'm horrible at small talk myself, so I've actually had to teach myself how to do small talk. And one of the things to do with small talk is the open-ended questions, because then you don't have to keep speaking. You can ask open-ended questions to the other person. So those are really powerful probing questions where I can ask clarity-seeking questions where I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more about that. And it keeps the other person talking, so the stress is not on me. The same thing works when you're facilitating a group of people through change, because you're saying, oh, you think there's going to be resistance to that? Tell me more about that resistance. Where do you think that resistance is going to come from? What could that resistance look like? It's totally different than asking, do you think there's going to be resistance? Yes. Versus, where do you think the resistance is going to come from? How bad do you think it's going to be? Who's going to be excited about it? When you change that first word, it's going to make a huge difference when it comes to those responses that you might get from them. So again, our close-ended questions: do, have, did, was, can, could, will, and are. And I will say, if you want to try to get rid of asking these close-ended questions, find yourself a work buddy or a home buddy. My husband actually helped me with this one quite a bit when I was working on learning how to ask more open-ended questions, and also learning how to not stack questions. Stacking questions is asking two questions in the same sentence. So I had asked him to help me with close-ended questions and when I was stacking. So every time I asked a close-ended question, he would simply look at me and respond with a yes or no, or whatever the binary answer was. Not because he was trying to be a jerk, because he was legitimately trying to help me. I asked him to help me with that. And he really helped me see how many close-ended questions I was asking. And when I started to reflect on it in my strategic planning with my groups, I didn't realize how many times I was simply just asking close-ended questions, taking those responses and moving on to the next subject, not seeing that there was resistance behind their eyes, or that there was something else that they were not talking about that I didn't know about. When I changed those questions around to open-ended questions, it took the strategic planning process up tenfold, because then I could ask different questions that got deeper into it to make the companies even more successful, to make the change even more successful. So those open-ended questions, again, how, when, who, why, what, where, and if, those are great open-ended questions to ask. So let's start thinking about asking more of those. One tip I have for you on this is to write out what those open-ended question first words are, stick them on a Post-it note, and stick them on your monitor screen so that they're always sitting there in front of you. You'll catch yourself. 7 years ago, when I went through coaching school to learn how to do this, I had to look at that list all the time. Today, I don't even need to carry that list around with me anymore, because I have those absolutely memorized, and it's very few and far between now that I'm asking a close-ended question. And if I'm doing it like a lawyer, and I'm doing it very deliberately because I don't want any more discussion on it. So I will typically use those if I need to wrap up a conversation and move on to the next topic. So our open-ended question, I talked a little bit about transferring on the responsibility of the solutions or the action items. And when you ask these open-ended questions, you are showing interest in the other person. And one of the things from coaching that we've learned is you are there basically to make time and be a sounding board for the person that you're coaching, because you're interested in them. You want to help them, and they feel that. They want to give time and space to whatever that topic is. And a lot of that is because of the open-ended questions. So when you use these open-ended questions, whether they're in one-on-ones about a change that's coming up, or if it's in a large group setting with change that might be coming up, you're now engaging in a thoughtful, personal conversation with those teams, which thoughtful and personal, that brings desire all day long, because you're curious about what they have to say. And sometimes you might need to fake it till you make it. You may not be curious at all, but a good open-ended question makes you sound really curious. So you are finding great information out. That's where the people are going to continue to elaborate. It's going to be hard to respond to. And again, count to 3 to 5 Mississippis before you might need to refrain. One of the biggest mistakes I see when people start asking open-ended questions who are not comfortable with the silence is they back down on the question, and they try to make the question easier or less personal. And I say, don't give up on it. Leave that question hanging out there. Let it dangle out there. Let it sink in for a little bit, because I don't want you backing off that question, because if it's taking them a little while to respond on it, you hit something. Don't give them an out. Let them think about it for a minute. If after, your 3 to 5 Mississippis, ring true, maybe you can rephrase it at that point, but I would still continue to push hard in on it. Do not give up. Don't feel like you've gone too far or that you're being intrusive. You're just doing your job as a good facilitator. Now, when you ask these open-ended questions, I find that it takes your meetings, and it may not be a good thing for you, but it might take your meetings that are typically a half an hour to an hour. You might find you need to start setting aside more time to meet with the team because you're asking the open-ended questions and you can't have those yes, no answers anymore. So you're going to have more team dialogue, which also might mean that you have more from the one person in there who likes to talk. That's your job as the facilitator, to cut those people off sometimes and do some round robins and ask directed questions to people and like say their name and then ask them the open-ended question instead of leaving it open to the whole group. So you might need to jump in there and do that a bit. So yes, question.
I'm curious if or when it would be good to have them write down the answers to try and prevent the talkers that take over. Like, you have a strategy of when it's helpful to write it down first and then share versus just share?
Absolutely. I actually do a class on the 8 dreaded types of participants in facilitation exercises, and my talker is one of those in there. And when I know that I have either a talker or somebody who is always right or just likes to hear themselves talk, the tools that I tend to use in those cases are I will ask an open-ended question and then have everybody write down what their answer is. And then I'll go around the room and let everybody respond to the question. I will never open that one up and say, who wants to go first? I will control that dialogue 100%. Other options in those cases, if you have the opportunity to, is to break them out into groups of 2 or 3 and have them discuss the open-ended question and then have them do a present back. My other tip for that one is if you've got more than one person in there who likes to talk, put those people together and it's like a Thunderdome. We'll see who comes out between that group. So I do like to do that on purpose. Sometimes I was like, I've got some of my clients on here, they know who I'm talking about when I do that. But it is a really good trick where we're like, we wonder which one's going to come out of this discussion. So either have them do it individually or sometimes I'll break it up into small groups. But you as the facilitator should be able to see that kind of going in, or you can pivot real quickly when you see one person is dominating the conversation. And then you're very much so welcome to have them just stop and start writing down those questions or do small breakout rooms. That was a great question.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Of course. Good. The other thing to think about with the open-ended questions is because it feels more conversational, it does not feel like an interrogation. And when you are working with teams that may not be as involved in process improvement or might not have worked with you before, or might just be nervous in general about the topic or who you are, or maybe they've never been asked these type of questions and they're nervous about it, especially if you've got more than one person in there who's asking questions, that can really feel like a really scary interrogation. And the close-ended questions do feel like an interrogation, whereas the open-ended questions, again, are more conversational with others. And we're asking them to expound upon their feedback, their feelings, their background, whatever that might be. So it can really help put the other team members at ease when we ask these kind of like softer questions in those cases. I'll save some of the more difficult open-ended question hardballs for later until they're good. But again, it's really easy at the beginning to ask some really soft open-ended questions for them. This also gives us more detail on how to address the root cause. So what I'm talking about with that is, instead of just saying, like, do you think account management is going to have resistance to this change? And they answer yes. If I ask the question instead of, what resistance do you think we're going to get from account management on this change? I might hear, well, it's too many steps in the process. They're going to think it's extra work. They have to jump into a different software that they didn't have to before. I'm writing all of that stuff down because those are all going to be talking points that I want to make sure that we hit in our messaging, in our training, instead of just knowing that account management is going to have resistance. Because the yes or no just said, yeah, they're going to have resistance, versus the open-ended question of what resistance do you think they're going to have? really starts to give me the detail that I can put into a good change management plan. So when I'm asking those open-ended questions, I am inviting people to the discussion the best I can. So it doesn't feel like just me as the facilitator interviewing them. It is a group discussion that we're having. And when you have that group discussion with the open-ended questions, fingers crossed at this point that they start to build on their experience. And we find this a lot in process mapping, where one person shares their experience about how that step in the process works. And somebody else in the meeting is like, oh, I do that, but that's not the way that I do it. This is the thing that I run into. So when you ask these open-ended questions around change, you'll typically hear people say, oh, well, that resistance might happen over here, but I don't know that that's going to be the same over here. I think they're actually going to be pretty happy about it. So when you have those open-ended questions and you've got the good, safe discussion around it, people will naturally build on those conversations together, which is so great when you can get to that point. My favorite tip on this one, and I know that sometimes I joke, I sound a little bit manipulative, and I promise I really am not. I'm a very, very nice person. But I also have the memory span sometimes of a gnat as I get older. So my quick tip for you is when you're having these discussions and I hear things that sound like resistance, or maybe there's an opportunity to make things better, or I've asked them a question on like, hey, what are you most proud of about this process? Or what part of this did you work on previously? I am going to write down what that was, and I'm going to write down who said it, and I'm going to put that in my OneNote file, and I'm saving it for later because I never know when I'm going to need that. Because if I'm now putting together the training and I knew from a previous participant, I'll pick on my husband, JP here. If JP tells me that I really did not like this process because the steps to approve are really, really cumbersome. I wrote his name down. I wrote down that doesn't like the cumbersome steps that it takes to approve. When I get into training and I have JP in training, I'm going to bring that up again and say, hey, JP, do you remember when you told me about how much you didn't like this step here because it was so cumbersome on the steps for approval? We got you. This is what it does now. And it makes it look like I have number one, remembered it. 2, I cared. And 3, I was listening, which I promise I really am. I just need to write this stuff down. Because when you run as many meetings as we all do, you have a tendency to forget who said what. But when you can pull this type of information back out months later, weeks later, whatever that might be, people are like, oh my gosh, you listened. You cared about what I was doing. So now that's the change in that personal change piggy bank I was talking about. So that if I have to slap something in there that I know they're not going to like, then I know I've already built up a little goodwill with them and say like, hey, we got this over here for you. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do something over here, but don't worry, I got something else for you coming later. Because I know what they're excited about. I know what they're not excited about. So some questions I might ask there specifically that really trigger this information. One is, what are you most proud of? So if I'm interviewing somebody about a process that might not be working or a change that we're making, and they tell me something that they're super proud of, and that is something that we're changing, I know I need to do some one-on-one communication with that person. So I'm writing that down. I'm like, yeah, we're going to have to talk to that person before we rolled out this change, because I know that they were so excited about it or they were so proud of it, and now we're going to turn their world upside down. So that's a good question to ask to make sure that we're setting ourselves up correctly to not crush their hopes and dreams. The next one is, what would you change if you had a magic wand? And I'm bummed I don't have a magic wand sitting in front of me here today. But normally I do, but I have a magic wand that it's got glitter in it and everything, that I'll ask people, if you had a magic wand, what would you change? Because that's kind of their wish list of things. If I could do something like that, that's really going to help with desire and help eliminate the resistance. So I'll write down magic wand idea, who said it, what it was that they said it. And I can tell you, a group that I worked with probably 2 or 3 years ago, we were updating their entire Salesforce process and bringing together like 50 some different branches into one process, which was super difficult. But we interviewed about 30 different regions to determine their steps of the sales process. And I recorded all this information of who liked what, who didn't like what their magic wand idea was. And I gave all of that information over to the IT team that was doing the development work. And they were able to build in some of these little magic wands and enhancements in there so that when we finally got around to rolling it out, like a year and a half later, we could pluck the names of those people out of that meeting notes and be like, this magic wand thing, Scott, that was your idea. This magic wand thing, Rachel, this was your idea over here. That was a really cool thing to be able to do. And I mean, salespeople aren't easy to get excited and change, but to know that it was something personal for them, they were pretty excited about it. Question?
Yeah, Julie, I'm curious if there's any value that you've seen when you're writing down what are they proud of and the magic wand to have the group or others see what you wrote down. Like, does that help when other people see that, help them think through or help them, oh yeah, I agree? Or, do you see any value with writing it down in a way that everybody sees it, or do you just put it somewhere where it's your personal note kind of thing?
No, good question. So I typically have a public list and a private list. So the public list is basically all of the ideas that are out there and typically like what function they were coming from. And then there's the private list, which includes all the people's names. So I feel sometimes it's really creepy, but I promise it works. So good public list of everything, of the desires, resistance, all that kind of stuff for sure. And then I keep the separate one on the side. Yes, which is why I also recommend having multiple monitors, because one is the public monitor that's shared and the other one is the one that I'm typing all the personal notes on. Good question. Awesome. Okay. So let's see how this works. Let's put this together. So let's pretend this is a process mapping session that I'm doing to try and improve a process so we can implement something new, and we've got some big change management coming. If I'm the facilitator, and this is sometimes when I'm working with a bunch of grumpy people, it is me asking, what's the next step in the process? And they answer to me, we send the invoice to accounts payables. Okay, write it down on my sticky, slap it up on the process map. And then I'll ask the question, is anybody else involved in that step? And they say no. So I'm like, okay, next step. And then I'll ask, are there any pain points around that step? And then they'll say, yes. Like, and so I might need to ask the question of, can you elaborate a little bit more on the pain that you're experiencing? And they could say, yes, because those are all close-ended questions. And if you think that that's not sometimes how it goes, that's how it goes sometimes, unfortunately. Sometimes I'm like, these people really just don't want to be in an improvement meeting, or they were voluntold to be a participant on that change project. And that's all you're going to get from them. So if that's the questions that you are going to ask, and that's the first word in the question you will ask that's going to be closed, that is likely the answers that you are going to be getting from them. I know it feels like a little bit of an exaggeration, but I've had this happen to be more than 2 hands worth of times. So we've learned from that. So if I change these around a little bit, same questions, but I change that first word. What is the next step in the process? This is the same one. We send the invoice to accounts payable. Then I might ask the question, instead of saying, is there anybody else involved? I say, who is involved in that step? They might answer then, well, we perform that task, but we need the information first from this business leader. Oh, okay, so I've got some inputs into this step. Maybe if I was doing like a SIPOC, for example, I might need to put that on my inputs list. That's information that I need to know before I move on to the next step. Then I might ask the question there is, okay, what kind of pain points do we experience in that step? Instead of, do you experience pain? So I say, what kind of pain points? Now, they might say to me, we're often missing the W-9, which means it comes back to us, and we have to set up the account manually, and it turns delays into the payment. And then that might start another question there to say, hey, Austin, did you say something the other day about maybe collecting the W-9 in the contracting process? That sounds like a much better conversation to have in those cases, where it's more personable. It is getting in more detail, and you can see there's essentially no yes, no questions in there. And people, I think, like to expand upon the information a bit more when it's good and open-ended. And absolutely that question in there about tell me more about that. Yes, Tell me more. I'm curious. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me more. Some things around the close-ended questions when it comes to change. A close-ended question, have you investigated other options? And instead of saying that, maybe try what options have you explored? Make them elaborate on that. A close-ended question could be, do you think that idea could work? Of course, they're going to answer yes or no. Or you could ask the question instead and say, what obstacles come up for you around that idea? That will prompt more questions or more answers, hopefully. My last one here, is there room for improvement? Of course there is, yes, everything. There's room for improvement on everything. An open-ended question, though, could be, how could this be better? And that is one question I think I ask every single day of my life. I'm always challenging people to make one thing better every single day, even if it's at work or home or one tiny little thing, always asking people, how could it be better? It doesn't mean that anything is broken. I'm just asking how they could be better. So I have a list of questions. I've got actually 2 pages of questions here for you, because when I was first learning how to ask open-ended questions and how to put the responsibility back on the people that I was working with, I needed these questions in front of me all the time. And anybody who knows me knows that I love everything laminated. And I keep these laminated on my desk so that when I'm working with team members, I can just pull these questions up and I'm kind of highlighting or marking down the ones that I think that I might want to ask in that conversation. Some of my favorite ones on here, it's the third one here, is what are you just tolerating right now? Because sometimes it's like, oh, well, I didn't think it was a big enough thing to bring up. It's not really a huge pain point, but it could be an easy fix. So the tolerating one is one that I like. One of my other favorites is, how would you explain this process to somebody else? And that is really where you start to hear and actually see their faces turn into, oh, that really doesn't make sense, does it? And then they're more willing to be like, yeah, I realize I can't even explain it and it sounds confusing, so maybe we should improve it. And another one in here is, how can we combat those areas of resistance? So asking people specifically, what types of resistance do you think we're going to see? And what would your ideas be on how we can combat that? Because what I find in a lot of cases when I'm rolling out change is, from a risk mitigation perspective on my project management side, the more the resistance that I have anticipated and have come up with a plan B on, so that when we see that resistance, we immediately execute on plan B. Sometimes they're like, oh, wow, they really thought that through. Yeah, it's not like we were just throwing darts at a wall over here. Like, we actually did some change management on this, and we thought this through, and we identified all the possible areas of resistance that we could think of. So we had a plan B in these cases. So I did put a whole bunch of questions in here. These are just some of my favorite open-ended questions up there. This next slide here is my specific ones on change and in what steps of change management I might use them in. So if I'm just at the very beginning and I'm working on like awareness and creating the case for change, one of my other favorite questions for this one is, what information do you need to know before you make a personal decision to support the change? Because so many times people are on the fence about whether or not they like the change. Those people are the dangerous ones. I'd rather have the ones who are actively dissenters or very happy about it. It's the ones who are in the middle that you're not sure about, that could go either way and bring a whole bunch of people with them. I'd rather ask them up front, like, hey, what's holding you back on this? What information do you need? What could I provide for you so that you would be excited about this? In dealing with resistance in these cases, I might look at this as, how could we reframe this to somebody? Or what could somebody be concerned about with these changes? Because so many times people don't think about putting themselves in the people's shoes that we're changing. So if I start asking a question about, why would somebody else be concerned about this? Or why would accounting be concerned about this? And they're like, oh, maybe I should think about somebody besides myself in this situation. So that's how I might look at the resistance questions. Understanding your influencers, thinking about who will be your change cheerleaders. Ask them, who are the biggest supporters of this? Who's got the most influence? I might ask the other question of this, is who's going to derail this? Who do we need to get on board who might be going the other direction that we need to monitor? And then if I need to enable others in this, I'm asking the question, how would you teach somebody about this? What would you need to learn in order to be able to do this? So I can provide them the right knowledge and the right ability for them to be able to move forward. And last but not least on this is measuring and maintaining. Really thinking through what would motivate people to continue with this change. How could we reward them? How could we measure for success? What things can we monitor to ensure things aren't falling back? And what is the best environment that we could create to help make this work? These are all really, really great open-ended questions that we probably didn't think about when we're putting together some of our change management plans. So I usually like to just keep this list in front of me and I'll go through it almost like a checklist. And people are like, oh, I didn't really think about some of that stuff. And I was like, yeah, we just sometimes just breeze past it. But if we can be, 10, 15 minutes more deliberate, ask a few more of these questions, it's probably going to pay tenfold back when you're putting together your change management plan. So again, our takeaway is hopefully today you have found something that you can run with right away, that you can take even right after this meeting today and jump in and start asking some of these questions. I want to make sure that you've got information that will help you be a better facilitator when it comes to change. And I am always around if you have any questions on this to ask questions. I love talking about this. I love sharing my experience. If you run into situations where you're like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do on this, feel free to reach out. I love talking about this information. I love talking about this little secret sauce, the change management world, to help make improvement better. So always feel free to reach out to me. You can find my contact information above. But I'd love to open it up for anybody who's got any additional questions here today.
I see you're doing 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and you did your water bottle.
I was like, you know all my tips now. I love it. Good, good. It really is simple. It really is simple. I promise. Just think about the first word that you ask. You're going to catch yourself now because you're going to find yourself starting a question and saying, oh, well, what have you considered in this case? Catch yourself, stop yourself, and then ask the question in a different way. It will make a huge difference. Perfect.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Julie. I'm sure everyone got a lot of great takeaways from the session, and thank you for such an insightful, thoughtful presentation. So everyone, feel free to give our presenter a big round of virtual applause if you want. It was such a great. I saw. Was that a question? I saw something come up, and then. Okay, sorry if I.
Good. Yep, there was a small question in there working about making questions too specific or narrow about leading the witness. And yes, that does happen sometimes. So sometimes the open-ended questions can be guiding. So use them carefully. I would say if you're not trying to guide the group towards a specific answer, you may want to leave it open instead of like, what options have you considered? And instead of saying something like, what would happen if you went down this path with this option? So sometimes it's taking a step back and reframing what the question is. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Julie. Thanks again for your time, and we very, very much appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. I took so many, I was just writing notes. So I'll go reflect on them, and thank you again. We're to everyone who's attending the session, we're gathering input to shape our upcoming presentations, and encourage everyone to participate, whether you're to tell us what are the topics you want to hear for future presentation, and also any comments that you might have for Julie. So if you want, please feel free to fill this survey for us. We would love to hear from you. And before you go, we said that you're going to receive the PDUs for your attendance for today. So yeah, if you want, please feel free. I believe, yes, I believe Patricia is putting all the links in the chat. So thank you, Patricia, for the PDUs survey as well. And please feel free to get in touch with the PSCP. We promise it will be fun, and connect with us on the chat, on the website, and the social groups that we have on LinkedIn group, on Blue Sky social media. We would love to hear about you. And yeah, everyone, our next time seeing you would be in November. So actually, we're looking forward to see you in November, and that one is an additional webinar that we host this year outside of our usual cadence. We're thrilled to welcome Andy, and he will be joining us from Quebec, Canada, and originally from France. Andy will bring over 12 years of experience in change management and has led the growth of change management team in large organizations. So I'm sure similar to this one, the next webinar will be just as fabulous. So thank you everyone for joining. Julie, thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone for participation. Patricia, thank you for sharing all the information. And special thanks to Corey, who put all the resources online. So thanks everyone. Until next time, take care of yourself. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.